Hi, welcome back to Deep Images. I am Henry Covert, and we are here to talk about movies. Our topic right now is called Strange Love Stories. So, with me here is my co-host Justin Cotton and C.F. Roberts, my incredible regular panelists Bill Mulligan and Briggy Williams, and our special guest panelist Tanya Atomic. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence, Tanya. And so, we're all reviewing love stories that are just unconventional, bizarre, taboo, messed up. Um, you'll catch on. It's going to be a long series, but so I think next in line to discuss such a film with us is Bill Mulligan.
Thank you. Thanks, Henry.
Sure.
It's great seeing everybody, and it gives me a chance to talk about a film I really love. And it is about love. Love can mess you up. Love can drive a good man to do terrible things. And there's probably no better example of that. 1971's The Abominable Dr. Phibes. This has got it all. Vincent Price in one of his best roles. Amazing direction by an interesting director whose name I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing correctly. Is it Robert Fust?
Fused, yeah.
Oh, really?
He
I
did
got it
the
right.
final program. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So I was so sure I was going to
Or
get it wrong that
foist, fused or foist. I've heard
well,
both.
yeah, I tried looking up other people reviewing this movie to see how they pronounced it, and there was one who was doing it like Feist, but she also pronounced it as Dr. Phoebes, so I knew she was not to be trusted. Although I went for the longest time before I saw the movie, I thought it was Dr. Phibes. I was convinced it was Dr. Phibes, and I thought that was a pretty boss cool name. And then I got to finally see the movie. I was disappointed. It's like when you think you know the lyrics of a song, and then you find out the actual lyrics, and you're crushed because yours were
Yeah, it's
better.
like, man, I may have
Yeah,
better lyrics accidentally.
yeah. That's the whole story of my love affair with REM. Anyway, 1971, Dr. Phibes. This was advertised as Vincent Price's 100th film, which
Wow.
was a really cool marketing device and 100% not true. So there you go. I don't know what his actual 100th film is. I'm sure he had them, but this wasn't it. But it's one of his best. And the story is pretty crazy. It's we open up with a series of murders, and not just everyday murders. These are cool murders. A guy who is flying an airplane, and suddenly there's a bunch of bats, blood drinking, vicious bats, portrayed by fruit eating bats, which they always use in these movies whenever they want to show terrifying, blood drinking bats. They get those big flying foxes, which would literally not harm you unless you were an
Right.
apricot.
They might just
So, but
cut
they're
you.
cool looking. And he goes down, and there's a bunch of different murders, and they finally figured out that all these murders have a couple things in common. They are all these people are medical folks who once worked with. Uh, well, they did a few things together, but one thing they did together was trying to save the life of a beautiful young woman who died unfortunately on the operating table, and her husband, a brilliant musician, was killed in a fiery auto crash on his way to see her. Yes, he died, or did he? No, he didn't. We figured that out real fast. Um, Also, the other thing is that the murders are all based on the 12 curses on the Pharaoh of Egypt.
Hmm.
Now, you might be saying, hey, I've read the Bible and I don't remember anything about the curse of bats. And, well, you just need to
Wasn't
shut up because,
wasn't that in the
okay,
Heston version? Wasn't it in the
yeah,
Heston
no,
movie?
no, there were no bats. There were no bats, nor were there unicorns or a bunch of other things. Look, they kind of play a little loosey goosey with the fact, but we weren't there. We don't
Who
know.
knows
Maybe,
what the Pharaoh, what
yeah, who
powers he had?
knows? And listen, it's okay to sacrifice facts for style. And this movie's got lots of style. It takes place in 1921 or so. So kind of modern, but not. We got cars, but they're cool looking cars, not like the junk we drive today. There's a lot of Art Deco, which is my absolute favorite thing.
Yeah, that's cool.
I 100% love Art Deco. That in
No, I do too.
Technicolor. It's an absolute crime that we let it go.
Yeah.
Um, and so they start figuring out that okay, then we get police, and we've noticed that European films, they do a lot of crime films, and the one thing they all have in common, like giallo is sort of crime based,
Yeah.
cops are useless. They are
Elizio
less than
Tesci's.
use
Yeah.
The only time the cops matter at all in the story is if it turns out that the cop is the killer.
Yeah.
And at least, yeah, at least he, in that case, displays some level of competence in that he has, in fact, killed people. But if you're hoping that these cops are actually going to solve the crime, good flipping luck.
That's why you have the
Oh,
Polizio Tecci movies because they're the cops, are just depressed because they can't catch the criminals. So
can't
they all
catch
do a dirty
anyone.
Harry and go killing them all.
But that's one of the things I love about Giallo is that the basic Giallo formula is some ordinary guy, plumber, let's say, witnesses a crime. The police immediately suspect him of the crime because he was stupid enough to report it. And it was like, well, someone died. You saw it. That makes you an obvious suspect. And he's like, is that how it works? And so this plumber has to spend the rest of the movie finding clues and eventually solving the crime right before the killer is about to kill him. Cops finally show up and drill him.
Right.
And that's their sum total to the whole thing. Well, the cops in this movie make the rest of them look like Jessica Fletcher because these guys are funny, but they're always not only are they like too late, sometimes they act. There's one scene where the cop, uh, Inspector Trout, who's really funny, well played, great stuff, opens the door for one of the soon-to-be victims, and that's when the giant metal unicorn flies through and impales him, screwing him to the wall. And the only way they can get him off is to unscrew the body, actually move the body around, because that's easier than unscrewing the head. So this is a comedy, which I did not realize at the time when I was watching as a kid. I laughed a lot, but I laugh at a lot of things. I was a funny kid. It's a black comedy.
Yeah,
And
my
now
mom called
looking
it a
at it,
send up.
yeah, looking at it now, it's pretty obvious that they were going for laughs here. But I just embraced it. It just
Yeah.
it's a great deal of fun. It takes a long time before we finally get to hear Vincent Price, who
Hmm.
speaks, although his lips don't move. Hmm. He he's out for vengeance. His wife, 9 people operate on his wife. His wife died. That's all he needs to go get him. And
There
but
you go.
but he's kind of like Death in the Final Destination films. Oh, sure, could just pop him in the back of the head like they're an insurance CEO or something. But no, he's going to kill them in some spectacular way. He's
Oh,
going to do it with style and panache. All right. And that's what we love about him.
carry
So
on. I'll
he's
be
out.
back.
No problem. I'll just yammer on while you're gone. So he's killing them one by one with all these really cool ways. My favorite one being he spends a bit of time cooking up some Brussels sprouts or cabbage or something, makes this green goo, waits for the nurse to be sleeping. She's under police protection. Ah, and drills a hole in the ceiling, dribbles the green goo onto her face, and then releases a bunch of locusts, which I was not aware of flesh eaters, but I guess so, because the next morning she's reduced to a skeleton. I mean, there's like a half dozen locusts, and they have eaten this, 100-pound woman. Okay, it's not high on plausibility, but it's pretty cool stuff. And oh man, then we finally get to hear Vincent Price talking, and it's wonderful. His voice is vocoded, but it's Vincent Price. And the writing is really good. The writing for the Vincent Price character is this very almost Shakespearean. It's gorgeous. Here, let me just give you a sample here. And he likes to talk. He loves the sound of his own vocoded voice. So he talks a lot. He's not talking to anyone. He's talking to us, whatever. He's got his wife preserved like Snow White. And then you realize why he's so nuts about this whole thing. It's Carolyn Monroe. Well, oh my God, Carolyn Monroe is one of the most gorgeous women who ever walked the screen. Golden Voyage of Sinbad. I fell in love with her, and I'm in love with her to this day. So, man, if I were married to Carolyn Monroe and she died on the operating table, I'd be out for blood too. Can hardly blame the man. So he's looking at her picture and he says, "My love." I wish I could do it in Vincent Price's voice, but alas, "My love, sweet queen and noble wife, I alone remain to bring delivery of your pain. Severed, my darling, too quickly from this life. Of fires drawn and memories met, I shall hold our two hearts together in single time." Yeah, man. He took it hard. He took this loss hard as he should. And so the movie is just the cops always several steps behind. Now we get to know the one, Dr. Vesalius, who was the guy in charge of the whole thing. And keep in mind, well, they established pretty early on that Phibes is completely unjustified in his thirst for vengeance. She died, as do we all. They did the best they could. This was not that they all showed up drunk and were using her chest to put chips and dip or anything. I mean, they really tried to save this woman and it didn't work. So, but anyway, and he's played by Joseph Cotton. And you look at Joseph Cotton, you're like, dang man, what happened? Because he's a great actor. He was in Citizen Kane. He was awesome. But in the later years of his life, he was making a lot of Euro crap,
He
Lady
was.
Frankenstein kind of stuff. Now
Yeah.
this is actually a bit elevated. It's
Yep.
silly as anything, but it's a fun film. And he's 100% acting the way Joseph Cotton acts. He always played it straight.
Mhm.
He's having a hard time not cracking up,
His accent is
you know.
incredible.
And
Incredible.
he's playing with Vincent Price, who's emoting but not speaking. We don't know why, but we find out. The final, after all the others have been killed, the last curse, of course, was the death of the firstborn. So Phibes kidnaps his son, places a key near his heart in a room where acid is slowly rising up through these tubes and will eventually come out over the boy who's chained to this table. The only
Hmm.
hope of rescue is for the doctor to operate as he did on Phibes' wife and remove the key, unlock the kid, and get him away from the acid before he's destroyed. So he gives him that chance.
Hmm.
And that's where Phibes reveals, these like doctors saying, I didn't kill your wife, but I will kill you. And Phibes is like, how can you kill what's already dead? And he removes his Vincent Price mask, which is what it's been the whole time, just a Vincent Price mask. And we see why he was always struggling to speak. He's just a skull. He's just
He
nothing
looks
but
cool as hell,
he's
though.
cool. He's cool.
Oh
He's
my
this.
God.
I made one of the first special effects I ever did as a kid was to find some liquid latex, very hard to find in the 1970s, and create a Dr. Phibes mask. I
Oh
probably took
wow.
10 years off my life from breathing all the ammonia fumes from making that thing. But God, I love this film. It was this movie really kind of changed my life.
Wow.
Um, and then we go off to the ending. There is the curse of darkness. And yeah, this movie's great. The bad guy wins, more or less.
And
He
has a
doesn't kill.
sequel.
And actually, the funny thing is, I saw the sequel first.
Oh,
And in
okay.
some ways,
Yeah, actually, I did too. You know.
yeah, in some
Yeah.
ways, I prefer the sequel, although I think it's an inferior film because it's the first one I saw. Now, very quickly, as soon as I saw the sequel, I had to see the first one. And I was a
Sure.
little disappointed because the first one takes time to build up, to introduce who Fives is and
Right.
what his motivations are. But having seen the second one first, I knew who the hell Fives was. I want to get to the Fives action. Stop showing me this guy in a
Right.
cloak
Right.
dancing around. But had I seen it in the correct order, I think I would put this film in its proper place. There's a lot of great Art Deco. Foist, whatever, is an interesting director. His films look really good. He has an artist's eye.
Yeah.
He doesn't do enough visual. Uh, Ms. Atomic said she's very influenced by Mario Bava, which is absolutely the best thing to be influenced by. I think of what
Hmm.
Bava would do is something like this. But then I think about it some more, and it's like, don't screw around with films you already love. And although Bava would make this a visual feast, given those sets and everything, and then the ability to do things with the camera that I don't think was in Robert Fu's really skill set. At the same time, the only Bava film I don't like is his comedy. Comedy's tricky, and especially if you're not, really good with the language that you're trying to be funny in, it's not easy to do. So maybe things are just
Is this
better
the
the way
Dr.
that as
Goldfoot
they are.
movie?
Oh my God,
Yeah, it's horrible.
I love Bava so much. I gave that film free opportunity, and I'm sure there's people who love it. I'm convinced every film
I've
is
seen them
somebody's
all.
favorite film, but
Yeah, I'm gonna prod you, Bill, so you can finally finish your collection. It's a you got a couple of gems left, I think.
I know, I said before, I love Bava so much that there's a few films of his I haven't seen, and although I could see them, I am doling them out slowly
Right.
because then one day there will be no more new Baba films for me to see because
Yeah.
unfortunately the man is no longer making any. And I think we found even the unfinished ones that there were. So,
Yeah, I love
but
Gavin Dog.
yeah, but this film, it's just a lot of fun. It really is. It's original. They keep trying to remake this, and so far, thankfully, they haven't because the person who's trying to remake it, filmmaker I like, Tim Burton, I just don't think it would work. I'm sure he would try to. I just don't think it would work. This is
No.
a film of its time. It's campy, and camp is hard to pull off.
They'd
People
have to
keep
get Willem Dafoe to play it.
Yeah, people
Mm.
keep thinking you can do that camp is easy.
Yeah.
I think it was easy in the 60s and into the 70s. But now when you try to do it, it just it's cringy.
Well, the
Very hard to
irony
pull off.
thing has come full circle. I mean,
Yeah,
everything's postmodern. So,
right. And audiences are not the same people that they were before. I think
right.
camp worked best with the audiences of that time, of which I was one. And
Hmm.
it would be hard to pull off. But Phibes, for only two movies, that character has really uh, been very influential. Jack Kirby, the great comic book artist,
Yeah.
bizarrely attempted to make or at least had plans to try to do a comic series. And I'm not sure if he was a hero or a villain.
I heard
There's a
something about
number.
that, but I didn't know.
Yeah, there's only a few sketches left, and it's like he's Phibes is a master of disguise. Guess you can put anything on that skull.
Kirby was so cinematic, and he brought that to comics, and then he was into wanting to turn TV and film that he enjoyed. We didn't get through the rights issues into comic books, and he was one of the first people to do that before Marvel started adapting like every single TV series or cartoon as a comic. But he did The Prisoner, and then it never got published.
Yeah,
And then a few
yeah.
years later, they picked it back. It was a DC. They picked it back up, and they tried to finish it with Gil Kane.
Mm.
Another was art was great too. It was Gil Kane and another great artist. They didn't finish it either. But I've seen the
The pr-
pages.
the
It's really
prisoner is another. The prisoner is another thing that is of its time. It's great. It's
yeah.
ahead of its time. But if they were to do it now, you can almost imagine when you see they're remaking this, and you can just see in your mind how it's going to go, and it's usually not good.
Yeah.
There was an effort to make a third movie. I'm very much into. I'm a very big fan of unmade films and all that. And there were a number of attempts to do a third Phibes film while Vincent Price was still alive.
Yeah.
The most interesting of which was Dr. Phibes versus Nazis, because yeah, I
That's why
mean
Why not?
you can just yeah, but there wouldn't have been a World War II if Phibes had put his what now here's the thing. What is he? He's a revenant. He is dead. And
Yeah.
there's talk about, the one at some point somebody says, my God, and goes, don't talk to God. God's on my side. God brought me back. But this is the Old Testament God. There's elements of this that are a little confusing. His beautiful assistant, Volnavia, gorgeous
Love that
woman.
name.
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah. She's what the hell is she? The original plan was, among other things, this guy has a degree in theology and musicology, but somehow can build robots. I clearly had the wrong major
He's
in
all
college.
purpose.
He's all purpose. He
Yeah.
has these clockwork creatures that play instruments and everything, and they're cool, but they're about the level of Chuck E. Cheese. Volnavia is a grown ass woman who is like played. She looks like flesh and blood, but apparently she's supposed to be a robot.
Right.
In the sequel, though, we start getting into some mysticism,
Yeah.
and it appears that Volnavia seems more like some kind of Egyptian goddess or goddess adjacent.
Mm.
Those of us who are obsessed with the Phibes films have wasted way too much time on Reddit and other places debating what exactly is the nature of Volnavia. How is it that she apparently dies in this film, although we're not really sure what they see when the acid hits her? And how does she just come back from some crystal background, and what's her deal? We don't know. I
Played by
like
a
that this
different character or
played
played
by a
by a
different
different actress.
actress, equally beautiful. Apparent, I think Virginia North, who played her in the original film, was pregnant at the time. I like both Volnavias; they're great. Never says a word. Hopefully, she was not paid by the line because she doesn't say anything, although she is
Yeah.
capable of speech.
It's good
And
to know.
gorgeous outfits. I mean, this movie, yeah, this movie is so 70s.
Oh, it is.
It's late 70s. My opinion, the 60s did not actually end in 1969. They didn't start until around 64, and they didn't really end until around 72. I think Watergate could be the
Yeah.
end
So
of
you're
the
saying it's a
60s.
late 60s ish movie.
It's
It's
just
a
with some
it's a
bleed
yeah,
over.
it's a very late, so late it's not even the 60s anymore, but it's got that vibe and
That
deserves
vibe
to
for
be in
Dr.
there.
Phibes.
Just as I, having been born in 1960, refuse, refute, reject the idea that I am one of the baby boomers. All right. If I could not get a ticket to Woodstock,
Amen.
and I couldn't because I was only 8 years old, I am not a boomer. My parents, we only live about 30 miles away from Woodstock, by the way. We could have gone to Woodstock. My parents were thinking about going to Woodstock and taking me with them, but they heard there might be trouble. Like the Hells Angels were going to show up. It's like, no, mom, dad,
That
that's
was
Altamont. It
Altamont
hasn't happened
later.
yet. Yeah,
Yeah.
come on, stop. Please, I could see Jimi Hendrix. I could have been one of the 10 people who are actually there listening to Jimi Hendrix. Watch the movie. They're all gone. They're all gone. They left. And all these people like, oh, yeah, I was at Woodstock. I saw Jimi Hendrix. Liar. You saw Sha Na Na. You left
You
right
couldn't
when
wait
Jimi
for Jimmy
Hendrix showed
Hendrix.
up at the end. These are all the lies they tell themselves. Fucking boomers. Anyway, that's 1971's Dr. Phibes. If you haven't seen it, see it, watch the sequel. Fun, fun, fun. Please don't
Absolutely.
remake this film, people. Come on, do what they did when they made this movie. Have an original idea.
Well,
Yeah.
I prefer continuations to reboots,
100%.
in my opinion.
What's that?
I prefer continuations to
Yeah.
reboots.
You know what?
Like
Just
David
bring
Lynch,
it.
they wanted David Lynch to reboot Twin Peaks, and he's like, "No, I got to get all the actors before they die. I mean, they're not dropping like flies."
Yeah, I mean, that's cool. Listen,
And he
if
did
they
a
want
great
to
job.
make another Dr. Phibes movie, Phibes Resurrectus was one of the names thrown around, which is just such a cool name.
Yeah.
Sure, go
The
right
death
ahead.
metal album.
And don't waste more than
Yeah.
5 minutes telling us the history of Dr. Phibes because we don't need to know. He's really cool. He's played by whatever actor is willing to step into Vincent Price's big old shoes. Good luck with that. You know it's going to be Johnny Depp. You just know it's going to be Johnny Depp. There's no mystery here. If Tim Burton does it, Johnny Depp is going to play Vincent Price.
If
And I
there's
guess he'd
no
be
other
about the same
actor,
age,
Yeah,
you
with his
there's
know?
face
another
painted
actor.
white.
I think based on the
Right.
roles he's
Yeah.
taken in the last few years, I would say it's Willem Dafoe. They always go to him for these kind of roles.
William Dafoe.
Lately,
Are you?
Yeah.
What's
he
the
was in
other
Death
guy's
Note.
name?
He was in Spider-Man. He was in.
The problem with William Dafoe is that when he pulls off his William Dafoe face and there's a skull, it actually would be less scary,
Oh man,
honestly.
he's a handsome dude. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Or Bobby Peru.
He's what about
Bobby.
Nicolas Cage? What about Nicolas Cage? What do you think?
He's in every movie, so he probably will be it.
Mm,
He's
I
in
think
I,
every film. You go on Tubi, and like every other movie
I
is
love I love
Cage.
me some Nicolas Cage. My fear is if you're making a Dr. Five, you're a modern artist making a Dr. Fives film, you're probably going to be very tempted to swing for the fences with the camp. And this movie, I think, strikes a perfect balance between, actors who are like Joseph Cotton, just acting, Vincent Price, who's for Vincent Price kind of underacting,
Hmm.
and people like the inspector that are seem to be. It almost feels like everyone's in a different movie.
Yeah,
I could see Nicolas Cage really cranking it up to 11, and that would be too much.
yeah.
mm,
But
He's a real chameleon, isn't he? If you look at what he was in Longleg, as sort of almost like a transgender type psychopathic type dude versus a professor in this Netflix film I just watched, where he was like a nerdy professor. So
No,
he
no, no.
covers the full range.
I love him.
Yeah.
He does. He's a great actor. And
I
and
think he
he's got
does
to make
too
a
many
lot of movies.
movies. He does too many movies,
Well, listen, this
and
is
he
what
phones
happens
in
when
them.
you
Phones in a lot of them in. Now, I'm not knocking that, but every once in a while, every other or every third or fourth, he's really great. I mean, that's what I'll hope. But I'll put it.
He
But no,
owes a lot to the IRS, and you know when that happens, you got to make a lot of movies.
well, he when he was divorcing Lisa Marie Presley, she made him sell his comic book collection. And
Yeah.
he had like the real deal golden early silver age stuff.
I think he had Action One. Didn't he
Yeah,
buy
he
that?
had
He had it under
Fantastic
glass.
Four one, but he reacquired them. I saw some videos years later, after he's working in 100,000 movies a year. He
Yeah, and
reacquired them. Right.
that's why.
Oh my
You
God, that's a heavy
That's
game.
okay?
after he sold his Cobras.
Sold it.
He had
All right.
Cobras.
Does anybody have any thoughts about the fives before we wrap up?
It sounds like a great
Saw them
movie.
both.
Okay,
Solid.
that's a good
It's fun.
thought.
I think you'd like it.
Saw them
Yes,
Holds
sounds
up.
both.
great.
Love them.
Chuck's seen them.
Love them.
Okay, cool.
Mhm.
All right. I've seen them both too, but yeah. How about you, Tanya? You probably seen them.
I if I had, it was when I was really young, because that sounds like something my dad was really into cult films and Vincent
Mhm.
Oh
Price. I've
wow.
seen a lot when I was young, but I can't remember which ones were which. I kind of get a
Right.
mix. So I haven't since adulthood, so I should revisit them.
Yeah, that's how I am with a lot of the older horror
Sure.
movies. Like we were talking about The Mummy earlier. I mean, I saw it when I
Yeah.
was a little kid, but didn't remember anything about it. We covered The Mummy. Tim covered The Mummy, Bill, and he and I and Tanya, we were all talking about how, when then you watch it as an adult, and it stands out so much from all the other Mummy movies that came after.
Um, do you know how they made that mummy, Jack Pierce? How he what he did to
Did
make
they?
that mummy in that brief little
Yeah, the
what
brief. No, I
15
don't.
seconds? I mean, Fuller's Earth wrapped him up in bandages, treated the bandages with acid so that when Karloff began moving, they would actually break away and crumble. And the stuff they did. So I made a mummy movie. It took us 6 hours to wrap the guy up as a mummy. And then I like, we're doing this wrong. Let me research it. Every mummy movie that's ever been made, it takes 6 hours to wrap someone up like a mummy where they can move and all the bandages don't just fall off.
Right.
That's the problem. Because it turns out in real life, mummies don't move. So it was a whole lot easier. But Jack Pierce was a genius. But when you read what they did to
Mhm.
get Karloff to look like that,
That's
on
wild.
his face and everything, the
Yeah.
colloidin and this really dangerous shit that they were
Yeah.
working with. If anyone were smoking on set, you would have gone up like a match. You're using ether soaked cotton that you put on the skin, and as it dries, it pulls you and gets these incredible wrinkles and stuff. It sounded horrifically painful.
Yeah.
So, if anyone wonders why isn't there more mummy in this mummy movie, no, that was as good as it got. The subsequent mummy movies, the ones with Lon Chaney Jr. and the others, they had, they weren't going to be able to do that kind of nonsense. Lon Chaney Jr. needed a drink. He was not going to be sitting there for 11 hours while they made him up. And there was a lot of masks, and you can see the quality of the suit and everything,
Yeah.
while much more functional. Doesn't have any of the effect. That scene where he comes to life is chef's kiss.
Yeah. It's
That's some
amazing.
great effects.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're going to wrap it up with this one then. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Deep Images. If you have not watched the show before, welcome to Deep Images. I'm Henry Covert, and my co hosts here are the amazing CF Roberts and the incredible Justin Cotton, live from Australia. And we're continuing our series on strange love stories. And we've had all kinds of different ones. So Justin's got one that is in its own way strange and in its own way definitely a love story. And it might be familiar to some of you and might be not to others. So I'm going to turn it over to him.
Okay, thanks, Henry. Well, the film is Tolkien. I'll sort of pronounce it my own way. I know it's pronounced differently in the film Tolkien, but I've always known him as Tolkien, and I'm a
I'm
big
going to
fan
stay
of.
with Tolkien. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of his work from since I was about 13
Represent.
or 14. So, but it's a biopic. So it's primarily a biopic about a great literary figure and his life, which most people don't know about. They might know Lord of the Rings, they might know The Hobbit or other stories, but they don't really know much about Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien, the figure. So
Mhm.
it was certainly very interesting and eye-opening to me to watch that. but it's also partly a love story, and in the sense that with his wife Edith, and when he first got to know her from a young age, ends up marrying her in later years after the First World War. So there's a conventional love story, but there's also a bit of a strange sort of hidden love story in the film as well, which I will explain in more detail as we go through. Um, but the movie is 2019. I first saw it on an aircraft coming on a long haul flight. So I've seen it since on Disney Plus. I think it's on Disney Plus, but I haven't seen it at the cinema.
Welcome, Briggy Williams, Funky Lollipop.
Hi,
Thanks
Briggy.
for popping in.
So yeah, it's a 2019 film. It didn't exactly set the world alight in terms of the cinematic box office. So maybe it will make more in terms of or reach a bigger audience on Disney Plus or Blu-ray or wherever else, whatever platform you watch it on. So it made about 9 million at the box office for cinema, but on a 20 million budget. So it actually lost money in terms of the cinema release.
Yeah.
But it still rates pretty strongly with the critics and also on IMDb. Well, maybe not so much with the critics. I think it was 50 something percent, but the audience was more like was higher than that on IMDb. But there's certainly strong performances with Nicholas Hoult was great as Tolkien. Lily Collins, an American actress, was good as Edith. Uh, Anthony Boyle plays Jeffrey Smith, who's one of the close friends in their gang of four when they're at college. And Derek Jacobi, very well known stage actor in the UK, was Professor Joseph Wright
Hi,
at
Claudius. You remember I
at
Claudius?
Cambridge University. So he was excellent as well.
Yeah.
So it basically starts with Tolkien at a younger age. His mother is obviously a very influential figure in his life. She's actually dying of some heart condition, but we don't really know this immediately. But she was always telling him bedtime stories about dragons, fire-breathing dragons, and so forth. So you can imagine that's where Tolkien got his imagination
You
from.
said fire-breathing dragons?
That's it.
I
Like
thought you said
Smaug and
I thought you said vibrating dragons. I'm sorry. That was
fire-breathing
interesting.
dragons.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
sorry.
No,
Yeah, so one time he comes home from school and he's only about, I think, 15 or so at this age, but his mother's it looks like she's asleep in a chair, but she's actually passed away, leaving him and his brother as orphans. But a kindly Catholic priest is effectively a benefactor for the kids, and he takes them to a lady in Birmingham who has a rich house, who she's like a benefactor for kids who've got nowhere else to go. This kindly old lady. So, and he then goes to the local public school. So even though he's hasn't got much money behind him as an orphaned 15-year-old, he's going to a hobnobbing at a school with much richer kids. And at first, he sort of he comes into conflict with a few of the kids because he's so smart when it comes to literature. Can memorize books even though someone's taken his book. He can memorize what was in the Chaucer book that was taken from him, that sort of thing. He gets into a fight with this one character called Robert Gilson on a rugby field, and then they get hauled before the principal. And it turns out the principal is actually Robert Gilson's father, this really sort of gruff, old school principal. And he says, as a punishment, you two are going to spend the rest of the next semester together. You're not going to be out of each other's sights. You're going to be hanging around together, going to classes together, having lunches together, etc. So at first I see that as a real chore, but eventually Tolkien has accepted him to Robert Gilson's group of friends, which includes Jeffrey Smith and Christopher Wiseman. So, and then Tolkien, of course. So there's four of them, and they're all kind of united by a love of literature and whether it's poetry, novels, or musical interest like playing the piano. So they formed this group called TCBS, which is called the Tea Club and Baronian Society, TCBS. And they basically go to these tea houses in Birmingham and they act like louts or lads and that sort of thing. But they also have this TCBS society group.
This is
So
so
it was
British. I can't handle
it's
it.
very, very, very British. Yeah, yeah. And then it sort of fast forwards, I guess maybe 5 years later, and they all look a bit older. In the meantime, Tolkien, there's a young girl who also lives at the rich lady's house because she's also an orphan, and she's very good at the piano. So her name is Edith. So eventually, Tolkien and Edith have a mutual attraction. It so happens that they first met staying at this old lady's house. Um, and so a bit of a love story, conventional love story, develops between Tolkien and Edith. In the meantime, eventually that comes into conflict with the Catholic priest who's the benefactor. And there's a scene where he says to Tolkien, well, she's not even Catholic, so I don't think it's a good idea you be seeing her because your grades are suffering. He says, when you're 21, which is not yet, you can do what you like, but until then, effectively, I don't think you should cut off your relationship with Edith. So Tolkien doesn't like this and basically says, well, the priest wouldn't know what love is anyway because he has to be celibate. But eventually, because of the threat of the finance being cut off that's supporting his schooling, he decides that he will have a conversation with Edith and says, look, if we can just sort of put things on hold for about 3 years, and once I'm 21, then we can rekindle the relationship. But in the meantime, she decides to end it, right? Decides to end the relationship. In the meantime, I think he's gone to Cambridge. They've gone to Cambridge University. They're no longer at high school, the four friends. And Tolkien receives a letter from Edith, which basically says, well, the news is I've met someone and we're engaged, which Tolkien takes rather badly and ends up having drank on the grass lawn outside the premises of the college late at night, and that the furor of him singing and talking loudly wakes up a lot of the professors who say, get off the grass, you're making a fool of yourself.
He's a dramatic dude. All right, so welcome in Bill Mulligan, our wonderful Supreme panelist. He's joining us now at this time, and we're going to continue rolling with Justin on Tolkien.
Okay, so so he's very drunk, and he's actually speaking in some sort of language. I don't know if it's Elvish, but the thing about Tolkien, as it turned out, he was a genius when it came to inventing languages, as he did for Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
Especially Lord of the Rings in terms of Orc language, Elven language, and so on and so forth. And one of the professors who has this late night tirade does actually pick up on this, as it turns out. But he's very drunk because of the news that Edith is getting engaged to somebody else, obviously. And Tolkien's friend Jeffrey Smith shows up and says, look, I've got to get you out of here. You're drunk, you're making a fool of yourself, etc. So what's wrong? And so Tolkien reveals the news that Edith is getting engaged to someone else, and Jeffrey's obviously very sympathetic and contrite. But the next day, they're watching a fencing exhibition, I think, at one of the buildings, and Jeffrey reveals something to the effect that I know how hard it is to love somebody when they, for whatever reason, cannot return that love. But in a sense, although that's so hard, it's the purest kind of love because it always burns brightly. It never diminishes because it's always unrequited. And so
I wish unrequited love felt like that, but okay, whatever.
Unrequited, yeah. So it's a very positive take on unrequited love potentially. But
yeah, a little fanciful.
The implication is that, and I think it comes through in the scene that actually Jeffrey Smith has a crush on Tolkien.
That's what I thought. Yeah,
and that plays out later on in the film. It's heavily hinted at later on when Tolkien's talking near the end of the film to Jeffrey Smith's mother. So out of the group of four, possibly Jeffrey Smith is the closest friend to Tolkien, although they're all a very tight-knit group of friends. In the meantime, Professor Derek Jacobi's character, which is Professor Joseph Wright, gets talking to Tolkien, and Tolkien says, look, the only way I've lost my scholarship, so the only way I can stay at Cambridge University is if I come into your course. And can I sort of persuade you to allow me into your course? And Derek Jacobi's character, Professor Wright, is an expert at I think Old English, Anglo-Saxon language. Mm-hmm. He wrote the books. He wrote textbooks on it. And he says, well, you can't just come into my class. I mean, there's limited numbers. But he says, if you can give me an essay on a particular subject to do with Old English of 5,000 words, I'll have a look at it and I'll decide. And he said, "When would you like that by?" And he goes, "Oh, this afternoon or this evening, this evening." So he's on a really tight time frame to get this done. But the next day, he's shown going into Professor Wright's class. So it's assumed that Professor Wright was impressed with what he said, what he
Yeah, I
saw.
mean, he probably did it in an hour.
Yeah, that's right. Because the implication is he's sort of genius level when it comes to these topics.
Yeah, I would say so.
And then there's another scene where Professor Wright's talking to Tolkien and saying, "Look, I have to say, I've read your work and I think it's astoundingly good. I've never seen anything like it. Please tell me some more about this or that." And then there's all these guys come rushing out saying, "War is declared. Britain is at war with Germany," and they're all celebrating because they're going to war. Whereas
Oh boy.
Professor Wright is looking very sort of solemn and depressed by the whole prospect. And and of course, the implication is that Tolkien will also have to go to war. Um, at and when they go to Folkestone, I think where the boat goes from on the south coast, the next day, Edith shows up to see Tolkien and basically say farewell. And they have this long walk on the beach, and he basically apologizes to her and says it's the biggest mistake of my life. Basically, saying we should put things on hold till I'm 21 just because of what the priest said.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, don't listen to the
And
priest about love.
and you can tell that she's not really fully on board with this other guy that she's engaged to either. So it ends up with a very, I guess, Hollywoodish folk scene where he's walking towards the ship with the rest of the infantry, and then all of a sudden she's walking the other direction. She turns around, and then he's rushing back towards her, and they have this very romantic, conventional Hollywood type scene where she says, "Just make sure you come back to me," basically, and don't die. Um, and I have to say, during the film, there's lots of flashbacks between what's happening in the conventional storyline of the film versus scenes at the front line on the Western Front, where there's shelling and people are in trenches. Um, and he's looking for his friend, who turns out to be Jeffrey Smith. So at that point, the narrative in the film shifts to the front line, and I think there's guys rushing over the top of the trench to rush at the German army, and there's people. German army are firing sort of flamethrowers into trenches, and you see Tolkien visualizing things out of his imagination to do with, for example, someone on horseback becomes like a Black Rider from Lord of the Rings, like one of the Nazgul. And when he sees a German soldier firing a flamethrower into a trench, he visualizes a fire-breathing dragon. There's all this smoke coalesces in the background on the battlefield. It looks a bit like a Balrog, which a Balrog being a sort of demon that appears in the first Lord of the Rings film in the Mines of Moria.
The Balrog.
It looked like a Balrog. So there's all these. They're layered on quite thick in terms of what he sees on the battlefield of the Somme, which is quite horrific. He sort of visualizes an imagination as some story that he's got in his mind, whether that's some
that's
form
probably
of
his way of coping with that. I mean, it's your imagination.
Yeah, a form of escapism, I believe.
Yeah.
At one point, he's suffering. Tolkien's suffering from, I think it's called trench fever, and he might have been injured as well in some way in his leg. And one of the privates, because I think he's like a sergeant or something, but one of the lower ranked soldiers is trying to sort of haul him out of a bit of a pit type thing, and it's sort of a symbolic, I think, of Frodo and Sam when they're trying to travel through Mordor in the third Lord of the Rings book. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he's trying to find his friend Jeffrey Smith, but he passes out, and the implication is he's been unconscious for 2 or 3 weeks, suffering from trench fever when he comes around. And Edith's at his bedside, and she says, "Well, unfortunately, Jeffrey Smith didn't make it. He died a few weeks ago in action at the same Battle of the Somme, as did one of the other gang of 4 members, which was Robert Gilson, the headmaster's son. He passed away in action as well. So of the 4 original TCBS members, only 2 survived, being Tolkien and Christopher Wiseman. So Christopher Wiseman survived. He was the one who was a good piano player, but was effectively a broken man after the war, and never really went anywhere with his career as a piano player after the war. But it says in the credits at the end of the film, they stayed in touch, Tolkien and Christopher Wiseman, and Tolkien, although their friendship was never quite the same, Tolkien named his older son Christopher after Christopher Wiseman.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So and then it pans forward to say I don't know 15 years later when Tolkien's now a professor at Oxford University. He's married to Edith, and they've got 3 kids. He's got writer's block, so Edith keeps saying, "Well, why do you keep talking about writing this novel and you've never got round to it? You haven't got time for your kids." So writing used to be a joy to you, but now it seems to have become a bit of a chore. But you don't really know quite what to do with it. So he's effectively got writer's block. And he goes to visit Jeffrey Smith's mother. And his mother, they meet at these tea rooms that the 4 boys used to go to back in 1912 or whenever it was. And she goes, "Well, tell me about Jeffrey." She goes, "Because I never really knew much about him, even though I'm his mother. And did he ever know love?" And Tolkien says, he sort of thinks about it, and he says, "Well, of all the people I've met in my life, possibly Jeffrey is the one who most embodies what it is to love and to be loved, because he was so compassionate and accepting as a person." So right from when I first came to the high school, even though I was an outsider, Jeffrey was the one who first accepted me into the group, despite the pressure of being part of another group that maybe didn't want me to be part of their group. And I think the implication is also that, his mother didn't really know, did he know love? Because Jeffrey Smith, I suspect, had been closeted as homosexual and had no relationship up until the time that the First World War broke out. But the clear implication is that he had, and it harks back to the earlier scene when they're watching the fencing exhibition, that Jeffrey Smith actually had a secret crush on Tolkien.
Yeah.
And hence they were such close friends. But Tolkien says, well, he's a poet. He's got all this unpublished work. Jeffrey Smith, he's passed away. I very much like it if we were to publish his book of his poetry, and I'll even write the foreword. And his mother's kind of reluctant at first, but eventually she says, "Well, yeah, I think that'll be a lovely idea. Please go ahead." So that was quite a nice sort of segue at the end of the film. And then the very closing part of the film, Tolkien's walking in the forest with Edith, his wife, and their 3 kids, and they're asking him about what he's working on. And he says, "I'm trying to think of a story." And Edith goes, "Well, have you started it yet?" And he goes, "I think I have." He goes, "But it's all in my head. I haven't actually started writing it, but it's all in my head." And the kids ask us, "Well, what's it about?" And he says, "Well, I think it's about journeys and adventure and fellowship. It's about fellowship." And then the very final scene of the film, he actually starts putting pen to paper for the first time and starts the opening line of The Hobbit, which is in a hole in the ground there lived a. Then he goes Hobbit, writes the word Hobbit, and the film closes at that moment. So so as a biopic, I think it actually works. It didn't really get much attention when it was released in 2019, hence the 10 million box office at the cinema, which was 10 million less than its budget. But I suspect a lot of people would have seen it by now because it's on Disney Plus, as I said. But in terms of a love story, it was very much a conventional love story at the center of it, if you put aside the biopic side of it. But also, I think there was the unspoken love story as well, which was that unrequited love that Jeffrey Smith had for Tolkien.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how many of you guys have seen it, but it's on a number of levels. It's worth seeing, I think.
Yeah, I remember when it was made. Nicholas Hoult gets a lot of work these days. I mean, he's in Nosferatu. He's Jonathan Harker.
Yeah, he was a central character in that.
He's also going to be Lex Luthor in the Superman movie.
Oh, interesting.
Wow.
The current one that's out now, that's coming out.
Yeah, it's coming out next month. I'm pretty sure.
Wow.
So yeah, he's moving up in the world, man.
I saw. He's good. And also Lily Rose Depp was in Nosferatu as well.
Yeah,
I didn't even know it was her until the credits came up at the end.
I remember her first movie was the Kevin Smith movie. Well, that's pretty cool, man. Thank you, Justin. The origin of J.R.R. Tolkien. Um,
Yeah,
have
Sounds
any?
pretty wild.
Yeah,
I think it helps if you're a Tolkien fan, but then again, of course, as per my parents, that you might enjoy the story anyway, even if you don't know his literature. But yeah, it was quite long, I guess, maybe 2 hours, but it was never really boring. I thought it was, yeah, because it had so much going on in it. Yeah.
Did you
I like
find
this.
this?
Go ahead, Bree.
Oh, I was going to say, did you find it answered a lot of questions as to how he got to be the person that he was? Did that seem authentic to you?
Yeah, it did because I had a bit of a basic understanding because I know his book so well. So I had a bit of a basic understanding that he'd gone to the First World War and he was making sketches of orcs and elves and that sort of thing to kill the time while he was in a trench waiting for action. So I sort of vaguely knew that, but I think to actually see the movie, it added more light and color to it. And also, I didn't know much about his love affair with Edith, or the fact that I didn't know anything about him being in a group of four guys at school from from high school days onwards. I didn't know much about that aspect either. So it certainly told me more about the author than I knew before.
I
Yeah,
actually did know about Jeffrey, that stuff. I read that somewhere a while back.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'd heard suggestions that there were sort of, what shall we say, latent homosexual themes between Frodo and Sam, in terms of,
Yeah, some people say
especially when
that.
they're
Yeah.
journeying through Mordor in the second and third books.
Oh, that's the
Yeah,
name of
so
a
but I
call.
didn't I
Journey
didn't really
into
know where that
Mordor.
came from, but now I do. I think, yeah,
Also
I'm
discussed
sorry.
it. Also discussed at length in a Kevin Smith movie.
yes,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
anytime men show any sort of affection toward each other, it's always perceived as somewhat homoerotic. It just can't be
Right.
positive, healthy male love.
But
Yeah.
homoerotic doesn't necessarily mean sexual when they link people in movies. I mean, nowadays they
Yeah.
ship people, what they call ship them. They make them couples. Like everybody
Yeah.
wants to see Captain America having sex with Bucky. But like, look at John Woo's movies. Those male friendships were considered homoerotic. But no, there was no sex whatsoever. It was
Mm.
Mhm,
that brotherhood of loyalty, to the end, even though there were other sides of the law. But it was
mhm.
that's where I first heard the term homoerotic. Was reading about John Woo.
Really?
Yeah,
I would think the phrase "the bros before hoes" is more homoerotic than anything else. Do you know what I mean?
I
Like, I
agree.
think that's more
Whether it
homoerotic.
knows it or not.
If you
Right,
really,
right, right.
yeah, I want to spend most of my time with women, so I don't
All
know what to say
right.
about this.
We're pretty cool. We'll make you a sandwich.
All right, we're getting out of control. So let's wrap this one up. And thanks, Justin. That rocked. And we're going to be back with more strange
Thank
love
you.
stories. Oh, Justin, didn't you want to talk about something important? I forgot what it was.
Oh yes, well, I hope you enjoyed that last review from me and every other review that you're hearing today and previous weeks. But please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Like the videos if you think they're worthy of a like, which I'm sure you will think they are. And you can feel free to contribute a comment. It's okay if you disagree with us, or whether you agree or have some other take. It's all good. So please do those three things, and we'll all be happy. Thank you.
Sounds good. Have a good night, everybody.
And it's true that we cannot see that far behind. If we looked all the way in the past, we'd go blind. In the night, from the stars as they've all lived their lives, and the light that they gave as they burned and then died.